The great hall of the Galactic Council was filled with beings from 12 different worlds. They sat in their floating chairs, arranged in a perfect circle under a dome of living crystal. Light from 1,000 stars passed through the ceiling in painted colors across their alien faces. Ambassador Kethvara stood at the center of it all. His gray skin caught the starlight as he spread his 4 arms wide. His voice filled the chamber like music. 300 years ago today, we made the hardest choice in galactic history, he said. We ended the human threat forever. The council members nodded their heads, or whatever they had instead of heads. Some clicked their mandibles in approval. Others flashed colors across their skin to show agreement. Earth is gone, Kethvara continued. Its cities are dust. Its oceans are dry. And the galaxy is at peace because of what we did. On a massive screen behind him, images appeared. They showed a blue and green planet burning. Continents cracked apart under the bombardment. Oceans boiled away into steam. It was Earth, and it was dying. Humanity was too dangerous, Kethvara said. They spread too fast. They fought too hard. They refused to accept their place in the natural order. We had no choice. The council chamber erupted in applause that sounded like thunder mixed with screaming wind. Every species had their own way of showing approval. They all did it now. Far away from this celebration, on a small moon called Kazari Prime, an old astronomer named Torvis was not celebrating. He sat alone in his observatory, surrounded by screens and machines that blinked with data. His gray skin had faded with age, and his forearms moved slowly as he adjusted his equipment. Torvis was Velenthai, same species as Ambassador Kethvara. But unlike the ambassador, Torvis felt no pride in what his people had done 3 centuries ago. He had spent his life studying the stars, and he understood something that the politicians did not. The universe was vast beyond imagination. Destroying one small planet was like removing a single grain of sand from an endless beach. His machines beeped. Torvis looked at his screen and felt his heart stop. A signal. There was a signal coming from beyond the edge of known space. He checked his equipment 3 times. He ran the data through every filter he had. The result was always the same. Someone was transmitting from a region of space that should be empty, and the signal was using an encryption pattern that had not been seen for 300 years. It was human. Torvis felt fear crawl up his spine like a cold insect. This was impossible. Every human had died in the cleansing. The hegemony had made certain of it. They had tracked down every colony, every outpost, every ship. Nothing had survived, but the signal was there, steady and strong. Repeating the same message over and over, Torvis decoded it with shaking hands. The words appeared on his screen in the old human language called English. He had learned it as a student back when studying dead civilizations was still allowed. We remember. We return. The door to his observatory exploded inward. 3 figures in black armor rushed into the room. They moved with the smooth speed of trained killers. Torvis recognized their uniforms immediately. Hegemony intelligence. The secret police of the 12 species. Step away from the console, one of them ordered. Torvis did not step away. Instead, his old hands moved faster than they had moved in decades. He grabbed a small data chip from his machine and slipped it into his robe. Then, he pressed a button that sent all his findings into the void of space. Broadcasting to anyone who might be listening, the agents fired their weapons. Energy beams tore through his equipment. Screens exploded. Machines caught fire. Torvis threw himself through a side door and ran. He ran through corridors he had walked for 50 years. He ran past windows that showed the cold beauty of space. He ran even as his old heart screamed for rest. Behind him, he heard the agents following. Their boots made thunder on the metal floor. Torvis reached the hangar bay and climbed into a small transport ship. His fingers danced across controls he barely remembered how to use. The ship roared to life and shot out of the hangar just as the agents burst through the door. They fired at him, but he was already gone, racing into the darkness between stars, in his robe. The data chip felt like it was burning against his chest. It contained coordinates. It contained proof. It contained the biggest secret the hegemony had ever tried to hide. Humanity was not extinct. Back on the council world, the celebration continued. Ambassador Cathfera raised a glass of glowing liquid. "To peace," he said. "To the safety of our children and their children after them. To a galaxy free from the human plague." The council members drank to his words. They smiled with mouths and beaks and tentacles. They believed they were safe. They believed the nightmare was over. None of them knew about the old astronomer racing through space with forbidden knowledge. None of them knew about the signals still repeating from beyond the edge of maps, and none of them knew what was coming. Torvis flew through the night, watching stars pass by like fireflies. He thought about what he had seen. He thought about what it meant. The hegemony had lied. They had lied for 300 years. And now the truth was out there, spreading through space like ripples in water. He looked at the data chip in his hand. Such a small thing to hold such a big secret. He wondered who would find his broadcast. He wondered if anyone would believe it. But mostly he wondered about the humans. They had survived. Somehow, against all odds, they had survived. And they were sending a message to a galaxy that had tried to kill them. "We remember." We returned. Torvis did not know if he should feel hope or fear. Perhaps both. Perhaps that was the proper response to humanity. They were a species that inspired both emotions in equal measure. He set his course for the outer territories, where the hegemony's grip was weak and rebels whispered in shadows. Someone needed to know the truth. Someone needed to prepare, because humanity was coming home, and Torvis had a feeling that this time they would not be so easy to destroy. Torvis had been running for 3 weeks. His ship was low on fuel. His food supplies were almost gone. And the hegemony was hunting him across the stars like he was a sick animal that needed to be put down. He landed on a station called Rust Haven, deep in the lawless territories where pirates and refugees lived side by side. The station was old and dirty, built from the corpses of dead ships welded together. It smelled like oil and desperation. Torvis walked through crowded corridors, keeping his hood up to hide his face. His picture was everywhere now. The hegemony had declared him a terrorist, a madman who had invented lies to disturb the peace. They were offering a reward for his capture that could make anyone rich for life. He needed to find people who would not sell him. He needed to find people who hated the hegemony more than they loved money, in a dark corner of a darker bar. He found them. Syra was a pilot. She was Kethri, a species that looked like tall birds with scales instead of feathers. Her eyes were the color of sunset, and they carried a weight of guilt that Torvis recognized immediately. He had seen that look in his own mirror. "My grandmother flew one of the ships that bombed Earth," she said quietly, her voice like wind through broken glass. "She told me stories before she died. She said the humans did not beg. They did not run. They stood in their cities and watched the sky fall. And some of them smiled, like they knew something we did not." "Why do you help me?" Torvis asked. "Because my grandmother died screaming," Syra said. "She saw their faces every night until her last breath. Whatever we did to them, we cursed ourselves too." The third member of their group was Mox. He was from a species called the Drell, small beings with blue skin and too many eyes. The hegemony had conquered his people 400 years ago. They had taken their planets, destroyed their culture, and forced them to serve as laborers and servants. "The hegemony tells everyone they bring peace," Mox said bitterly. "They do not mention the graves they build to make that peace. If humans survive, maybe others can survive too. Maybe we can all be free." Together, the three of them set out to find the truth. Syra knew people who knew people. She had contacts in places that did not officially exist. Through bribes and threats and careful whispers, they found a way into a hegemony intelligence archive on a station called Cold Eye. Breaking in nearly killed them. Syra flew their ship through a defense grid that should have been impossible to pass. Mox hacked security systems that were supposed to be unbreakable. Torvis used his scientific knowledge to bypass alarms that other thieves would never understand. What they found inside the archive changed everything. The files were old, dating back to the day Earth died. Torvis read them with growing horror, his forehands trembling as he scrolled through page after page of secrets. 17 ships, he whispered. 17 human colony ships escaped through an unstable wormhole during the bombardment. Syra leaned over his shoulder. The hegemony reports say that was suicide. No ship could survive passage through an unstable wormhole. A hegemony lied, Torvis said. Look at this. They sent scout ships through that same wormhole 50 years later. The scouts never came back. But before they lost contact, they sent one message. He played the recording. A voice spoke in crackling static filled with terror. They are here. The humans are here. They have ships. So many ships. They have been building for 50 years. They are coming for us. They are going to. The message cut off in screams. The hegemony has known for 250 years, Mox said slowly. They have known humans survived, and they kept it secret. The files contained more horrors. Torvis found records of scientists who had stumbled upon the truth. All of them had died in accidents. He found reports of deep space explorers who had wandered too close to the hidden wormhole. Their ships had been destroyed by hegemony forces and blamed on pirates. For generations, hegemony had been killing anyone who learned the truth. They had been lying to trillions of beings across 12 species, and they had been preparing in secret, building weapons and defenses against an enemy they told everyone was dead. We need to tell people, Syra said. Everyone needs to know. No one will believe us, Mox replied. The hegemony controls the news. They control the networks. They control everything. Torvis smiled for the first time in weeks. Not everything. Remember the broadcast I sent when they attacked my observatory? It is still out there, bouncing from station to station. There are people who have seen it. People who are asking questions. He pulled out his data chip. We need to add to that broadcast. We need to send everything we found here. Names, dates, proof. Let the hegemony try to explain this. They worked through the night, copying files and encoding messages. When dawn came to the station's artificial sky, they transmitted everything to 100 different networks, 100 different rebel groups, 100 different journalists who had been silenced by the hegemony for too long. The response was immediate. Within hours, riots broke out on 3 worlds. Species that had been quiet for centuries began to ask dangerous questions. The hegemony tried to block the transmission, but it was too late. The truth was spreading like fire through dry grass, and at the end of the transmission, they included something extra. A piece of intercepted hegemony military communication from just 3 days ago. Admiral was speaking to his fleet commanders. His voice was shaking. This is not a drill. Long-range sensors have detected movement near the wormhole. Massive movement. We count over 2,000 signatures. They match no known vessel configurations. Another voice answered, barely able to speak. What are your orders? The Admiral's response echoed across the galaxy. Pray. Pray to whatever gods your species believes in, because they are not just alive. They have been building, and they are coming home. In the dark corners of 100 worlds, oppressed peoples heard those words and felt something they had not felt in generations. Hope and fear, because humanity was returning. And no one knew what they would find when they arrived. On the other side of the unstable wormhole, in a cluster of stars that no alien had ever seen, humanity lived. They called their new home New Dawn. It was a system of 7 habitable worlds, discovered by desperate refugees 300 years ago. Those first survivors had arrived in broken ships with empty food stores and dying engines. They had numbered less than 2 million souls. Now they numbered 8 billion fleet. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the Bridge of the Remembrance, the largest warship humanity had ever built. She was a small woman with gray hair and eyes like black steel. Her family had served in the fleet for 4 generations. Ever since her great-grandmother had been a child on one of the 17 colony ships that escaped Earth, through the massive windows of her bridge, Tanaka could see the Armada. 2,000 warships floated in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with weapons that the hegemony could not imagine. Behind them, transport ships carried supplies for a campaign that might last years. And behind those generation ships held civilians who had volunteered to help rebuild whatever remained of Earth. Admiral, her communications officer said, "We have received a signal from the other side of the wormhole. Tanaka turned. "Show me." The message played across her screen. It was the broadcast that Torvis had sent, along with everything he had found in the Hegemony archives. Tanaka listened to it all with a face that showed nothing. But inside, her heart was burning. "They covered it up," she said quietly. "They killed our world, and then they pretended we never existed." "Yes, Admiral." Tanaka looked out at her fleet again. She thought about everything her people had built over 3 centuries. The first generation of survivors had nearly destroyed themselves with grief and anger. They had wanted to go back immediately, to throw themselves at the hegemony in a suicidal attack. But cooler minds had won. They realized that revenge would have to wait. First, they needed to survive. Then they needed to grow strong. The second generation had focused on building. They made cities on barren worlds. They grew food in places where nothing should grow. They turned their anger into determination and their grief into fuel. The third generation had begun the great work. They had studied the weapons that destroyed Earth. They had taken them apart and learned every secret. Then they had made them better. They developed shields that could stop any energy beam. They created engines that could outrun any ship. They designed weapons that could crack planets like eggs. And the fourth generation, Tanaka's generation, had prepared for war. Every human on New Dawn knew the history. They learned it in schools, in temples, in bedtime stories told by parents to children. They knew the names of every city that had burned on Earth. They knew the name of every species that had voted for their destruction. And they knew why they were building the Armada, not for revenge, for justice. There was a difference. Tanaka walked through the corridors of her ship, heading for the assembly hall where the Council of New Dawn was waiting. Soldiers saluted as she passed. Engineers nodded with respect. Everyone knew that today was the day they had waited 300 years to see. The council chamber was filled with the leaders of humanity. Presidents and generals, scientists and philosophers, religious leaders and artists. They represented every culture that had survived Earth's death. They had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment. "The signal is confirmed," Tanaka said as she took her place before them. "The galaxy knows we exist. The hegemony's lies are falling apart, and there are species out there who are ready to rise up against their oppressors." An old man with dark skin stood up. He was James Okonkwo, the spiritual leader of the largest faith on New Dawn. In his hands, held a small container of gray ash. "This is soil from old Earth," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every soldier in our fleet carries some. It reminds them what was taken. It reminds them why we fight." "And what do we fight for?" Tanaka asked. It was a ritual question. Everyone knew the answer. "Not extinction," the council replied in unison. "Not genocide. We fight for justice. We fight so that what happened to us will never happen again." Tanaka nodded. "The hegemony will expect us to be animals. They will expect us to burn their worlds like they've burned ours. They will expect us to become the monsters they always said we were." She paused and looked at every face in the room. "We will prove them wrong. We will offer mercy to those who surrender. We will free the species they have enslaved. We will show the galaxy that humanity is not what the hegemony claimed. We are not destroyers. We are protectors." The council voted. It was unanimous. The Armada would launch. Tanaka returned to her bridge as the fleet began to move. 2,000 ships turned toward the wormhole, their engines lighting up the darkness like a river of stars. Behind her, she heard her crew whispering prayers in a dozen different languages. She opened a channel to the entire fleet. 8 million humans waited to hear her words. 300 years ago, she said, our grandparents fled Earth in terror. They were refugees. They were survivors. They were the last hope of our species. She watched the wormhole grow larger on her screen, a swirling hole in reality that led back to the galaxy that had tried to murder them. Today, we are not refugees. We are not fleeing. We are returning, and we are bringing the thunder. The first ship entered the wormhole, then another, then 100 more. The Armada poured through the impossible passage like water through a broken dam. On the other side, Hegemony sensors screamed warnings. Officers stared at their screens in disbelief. Communications channels filled with panic and terror. Humanity had come home, and they had brought an army and her small ship hiding in an asteroid field. Syra watched the human fleet emerge from nothing. She had never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying beside her. Torvis whispered words he had learned from ancient human texts. "From the ashes we rise." Mox said nothing. He simply watched with all of his many eyes, and for the first time in his life, he smiled. The first battle lasted 19 minutes. A hegemony defense fleet of 400. Ships had been waiting near the wormhole for decades, just in case the humans ever found their way back. They were the best ships the 12 species had ever built, crewed by the finest officers in the galaxy. They had trained their entire lives for this moment. They never stood a chance. Admiral. Tanaka did not give speeches or make threats. She simply gave one order: engage. The human fleet moved like a single living creature. Ships split into groups of 50, surrounding the hegemony formation from every direction. They moved faster than should have been possible. Their engines burning with technology the hegemony had never seen. The hegemony commander ordered his ships to fire. Energy beams and missiles filled the space between the fleets. It was enough. Firepower to destroy a moon. The human shields held. Every beam bounced away. Every missile exploded harmlessly against barriers of pure force. The hegemony weapons that had burned Earth to glass 3 centuries ago could not even scratch the paint on human ships. Then the humans fired back. Their weapons were something new. They did not use energy beams or explosives. They used focused gravity itself, crushing enemy ships like paper cups in a giant fist. Hegemony vessels folded in on themselves, their crews dying before they could even scream in 19 minutes. 400 ships became 400 clouds of debris. Admiral Tanaka watched the destruction on her screen. She felt no joy. These were not the people who had killed Earth. These were their descendants. Following orders from leaders who had lied to them for generations. "Open a channel," she said. "Broadcast to all frequencies." Her face appeared on every screen in hegemony space. Trillions of aliens saw a small human woman with gray hair and calm eyes. "I am Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the Human Armada," she said. 300 years ago, your ancestors tried to destroy my species. They failed. We have returned, but not for revenge." She paused to let her words sink in. "We know that many of you were lied to. We know that some of you have suffered under hegemony rule, just as we suffered. To those species, we offer friendship. Surrender your hegemony forces, and we will help you rebuild as free peoples." Her eyes hardened. "But to those who choose to fight, who choose to defend the ones who murdered our world, know this: we have spent 300 years preparing for this moment. We have weapons you cannot stop. We have ships you cannot catch. And we have a patience born from loss that you cannot imagine." She leaned forward. "Choose wisely." The effect was immediate. The hegemony was not a union of equals. It was an empire with the Valenthi at the top and everyone else below them. Many species had been conquered, not invited. They served because they had no choice, not because they believed in the cause. Within 3 days, 3 species announced they were leaving the hegemony. Their fleets stood down. Their leaders sent messages to Admiral Tanaka, asking for peace. On a dozen worlds, pressed peoples rose up against their hegemony masters. Mox's homeworld, Drella, was one of the first. For 400 years, his people had been slaves in everything but name. Now they flooded the streets, tearing down statues of Valanthi conquerors, burning the flags that had flown over them for generations. Human ships arrived at Drella within a week. They did not come as conquerors. They came as liberators. Mox stood in the ruins of a hegemony administration building, watching human soldiers help his people. They were distributing food. They were providing medical care. They were treating the Drell as equals, something no species had done in centuries. Beside him, Syra and Torvis watched in wonder. "They could burn this world," Syra said quietly. "After everything, they could burn every world in the hegemony. No one could stop them. But they are not burning anything, Torvis replied. They are healing. A human officer walked up to them. She was young, with brown skin and kind eyes. She carried no weapon. You are the ones who sent the broadcast, she said. It was not a question. Admiral Tanaka would like to thank you personally. They were taken to the Remembrance, where Tanaka met them in a simple room with no decoration. She shook each of their hands in the human way. You risked everything to tell the truth, she said. Because of you, the galaxy knows what really happened. Because of you, species are finding the courage to fight for their freedom. Mox could not speak. His many eyes were wet with tears. Tanaka noticed and smiled gently. I know your history. The Drell were among the first species the hegemony conquered. They used your people as an example to frighten others into submission. We never forgot who we were, Mox managed to say. Even when they tried to take everything from us, we remembered. So did we, Tanaka said. That is what makes us alike. That is why we will win. The war continued, but it was not really a war anymore. It was a collapse. The hegemony was falling apart from the inside. Every day, more species defected. Every day, more worlds declared independence. The Volanthi High Command watched their empire crumble and grew desperate. They pulled their fleets back to their homeworld, Volante Prime. They built defense platforms around their planet. They prepared for a last stand. Admiral Tanaka gathered her fleet and set course for the Volanthi homeworld. This would be the final battle. This would be where humanity faced the species that had murdered Earth, on the bridge of the Remembrance. Tanaka looked at a photograph she kept in her pocket. It showed a city called Tokyo, taken the day before the bombardment. Her great-grandmother had grown up there. You're coming, she whispered to the picture. We are almost home. Behind her, 2,000 ships followed their admiral into the darkness. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. The end was coming. The skies above Volanthi Prime burned with the fire of 1,000 suns. 1,200 hegemony warships formed a wall around their homeworld. Defense platforms bristled with weapons. Shield generators created barriers of energy that wrapped the entire planet. The Volanthi had spent 3 centuries preparing for this day, pouring all their fear and guilt into machines of war. Against them came the human Armada, 2,000 ships, carrying 8 million humans who had waited their entire lives for this moment. Admiral Tanaka stood on her bridge and studied the enemy formation. She could see their fear in the way they clustered together, trying to protect each other. They knew they could not win. They were fighting anyway, because surrender meant facing judgment for what their ancestors had done. Our ships, she said calmly. Begin assault. The battle for Volanthi Prime was not like the first engagement. This was not a quick slaughter. The Volanthi had learned from their losses. They had adapted their tactics. They fought with the desperation of a species facing extinction. Human ships fell. The Valiant, a cruiser with a crew of 3,000, was caught by concentrated fire and torn apart. The Morning Star, a destroyer that had been the first ship through the wormhole, was rammed by a Volanthi battleship in a suicide attack. Good people died by the thousands. Their names added to a list that had been growing for 300 years, but the humans did not break. They did not retreat. They had waited too long and come too far to stop now. For 6 hours, the void around Volanthi Prime was filled with death. Ships exploded in silent flowers of flame. Debris clouds spread across space like fog. The darkness itself seemed to be bleeding light. Slowly, inevitably, the Volanthi line began to crack. Their ships were powerful, but human technology was better. Their crews were brave, but human coordination was perfect. Every time a gap appeared in their formation, human ships poured through it. Every time they tried to regroup, human tactics prevented them, one by one. The Volanthi ships died when the last enemy vessel broke apart. Admiral Tanaka ordered her remaining forces to surround the planet. 1,500 human ships still survived, their weapons pointed at a world of 8 billion souls. Open a channel to the surface, she said. A Volanthi face appeared on her screen. It was High Commander Sorvith, the leader of the Volanthi military. His gray skin had gone pale with fear. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was shaking. Justice Tanaka replied, "Surrender your government. Allow my forces to land peacefully. Submit your leaders to trial for crimes against humanity. And if we refuse..." Tanaka did not blink. "Then I will demonstrate what human weapons can do to a planet. You will understand exactly what our ancestors experienced 300 years ago." The channel went silent. For 20 minutes, the galaxy held its breath. Then the Volanthi surrendered. Human transports descended through the atmosphere of Volanthi Prime, landing in the capital city that had once been the seat of galactic power. Soldiers in black armor marched through streets that had never known foreign boots. They passed statues of Volanthi heroes and monuments celebrating the cleansing of humanity. Admiral Tanaka walked into the Great Council Chamber, the same room where the vote to destroy Earth had taken place 3 centuries ago. The surviving leaders of the hegemony waited for her there, surrounded by human guards. They expected death. Tanaka looked at each of them in turn. She saw fear in every alien face. She saw guilt. She saw beings who had been taught their entire lives that what their ancestors did was right, and who were now facing the consequences. She pulled a small data chip from her pocket and placed it on the table before them. "This contains something your species tried very hard to destroy," she said. "Genetic records. Cultural archives. The complete history of every species the hegemony erased or enslaved over the last 1,000 years." The Volanthi stared at the chip in confusion. They had expected weapons or chains. They did not understand. "We found these in your own vaults," Tanaka continued. "You kept records of every culture you crushed, every people you deleted from history. You treated them like trophies." She pushed the chip toward them. "We are returning them to their rightful owners. The Drell will have their history back. The Kethri will learn the truth about their past. Every species you conquered will know what they lost and what was taken from them." High Commander Sorvith finally found his voice. "You are not going to destroy us." Tanaka's eyes were cold as stars. "You tried to delete us from existence. We could do the same. We have the power. We have the right. Every human in this fleet lost ancestors to your bombardment. Every single one of us carries a piece of Earth in our hearts, and every single one of us dreamed of watching your cities burn." She paused. "But we are not you. We did not survive 300 years just to become the monsters you always claimed we were. You will face justice. Your leaders will stand trial. But your people will live. Your children will grow up in a galaxy that is finally free." The trials lasted 3 months. The evidence was overwhelming. 17 Volanthi leaders were found guilty of crimes against sentient life and imprisoned for the rest of their natural lives. The hegemony was dissolved. In its place, humanity helped build a new galactic compact based on equality and mutual protection. No species would ever again have the power to destroy another, and Earth became sacred ground. The radiation had faded over 3 centuries. The dust had settled. The wounds were still visible from orbit, great scars across continents where cities had once stood. But the planet was healing. On the soil of what had once been called Europe, Torvis stood beside Admiral Tanaka. Behind them, thousands of humans knelt and touched the ground that had given birth to their species. Many were crying. Tanaka planted a flag in the earth. It showed a blue circle representing Earth, surrounded by 17 stars for the colony ships that had escaped. "We believed you were extinct," Torvis whispered. Tanaka watched the sunrise paint colors across a sky that had been dark for 300 years. She thought about her great-grandmother, who had fled this world as a child. She thought about all the generations who had worked and sacrificed so that this moment could happen. "Humanity does not go extinct," she said softly. "We just go quiet for a while." In the distance, construction drones began their work. Cities would rise again. Oceans would be restored. Forests would grow where deserts had spread. It would take generations. But humanity had learned to be patient. and they had all the time in the universe.